will be relevant to what we're talking about. So just to go off, so in literature, Foster explained that sex actually doesn't have to look like sex. And then the reason for that is, really think about it. How many ways can you really present sex, you know? There's a... Okay, everything I'm going to say is relevant, okay? There's a male and a female, right? And there are only so many ways that you can, you know, interact in that way. Therefore, Foster explains that in literature, authors have come up with different ways to show, guys, to show sex, but not actually showing sex. So they're using other different ways to show sex, and which we'll explain. And yeah, because of that, it's more flexible to do so. That's funny, right? Okay. Yep. Oh, so Freud first came up into books by making it subtle. And so there are specific words and phrases that go along that describe female or male parts or sex in general. And so rolling landscapes can mean female sexuality, tall buildings, male sexuality, stairs can mean sexual intercourse, and that's a guy falling up the stairs. Don't worry about that picture. If you guys go through this, if you guys take AP psychology, he's the guy that came up with the term like you have a sexuality within your subconscious, and then it's like really linked to your behavior and all that. So yeah, he's kind of the first person to really start it.
Fraud.
Freud, yeah.
Freud.
So that's the guy that started. Go for it, Jack. Yeah.
Okay, so basically, like, we can see, in, like, the quest of, like, the Holy Grail, basically, like, this is, like, an example of how he uses, sex in, like, a really indirect, like, implicit way. So, like, the emblem of, like, the pure and, like, untested male before, like, the actual, like, quest is, like, manhood, and it's, like, like, the lance was, like, phallic. And then the Holy Grail is, like, empty, like, thing to be, like, filled, so...
Yeah,
so it represents, like, fertility, and it also, like...
So basically, so as we said, knight represents male sexuality, the Holy Grail and the knight is supposed to search for represents female sexuality, so in in literature ways, it's sex. And if we see another interesting is that usually a knight comes from really hard times. His kingdom is dying, everybody's dying, and it's all dying. And usually the Asian king sends the knight on a quest to restore fertility into the kingdom, right? And this is important because the king is old. And like old people, like Foster explains, can't really have sex. So by sending a knight, it's representative of how like old people can't do it, while younger people can. I'm sorry, this is a really
He looks
appropriate as possible. Say that's an important part to notice. Yeah. Go, Jack.
Definitely.
Oh my god.
So basically, in literature, Foster explains that there are small details that a lot of people often miss that represent sex. Now, first of all, in Maltese Falcon, there is a scene where Sam and Bridget, two main characters, are intensely making out. And suddenly, the scene switches to a gentle wind blowing on the curtains on the windows. So it doesn't show exactly what happened, but Foster explains that that scene actually represents the fact that they did have sex and that it went very well, because that's a symbolic. North by Northwest shows train entering a tunnel. I don't have to explain this. Small details like beach waves, campfires, curtains, and obviously fireworks that may represent sexuality. And in novels, that was movies, we see a novel called Janice where there's a young woman, she marries, but she doesn't really like her husband. And she has an affair. And this affair guy she had with buys her a bull. This represents her female sexuality. And the funny thing is that she becomes to love the bull because she loves the man she had an affair with. And later on, it's important to note that she doesn't let her husband put his keys in the bull. Right? Keys is male sexuality, bull is female sexuality. She doesn't love him anymore, so doesn't want to have sex, so he doesn't, yeah. See, this is a symbolic way of how people, authors in literature show sex, but not really sex. So keys and bulls. So yeah, I'm not going to do that at the same time. Next one, please. It's funny. Alright. So the main reason why sex was put into subtle ways and not indirectly was because sex was considered taboo in the old days and they were censored. And so
D.H. Lawrence is an untapped resource in the book Lady Chatterley's Lover,
where two main guy characters are wrestling. It actually represents homosexuality.
And homosexuality back in the old days was considered taboo and they did not allow it. And so that's why I did put it in those
Yeah,
words.
just sex in general was kind of like they didn't want it. And the huge example was Ulysses, is that what you say? Ulysses was censored, banned, and confiscated in both US and UK for small sexual implications. So they were like really didn't want them to show sex. So he came up with different ways to show sex. Next one, please.
Alright. So the next part, except when it's not sex. So when authors actually write about sex, it's not about sex. And so one prime example of this is Titanic. When before they're drawing her, and they Jack and Rose don't have sex, but they're only looking into deep into each other's eyes. And so that's the same way they're having sex. And then after that they do have sex, but then that part when they actually have sex, it's actually symbolic of how they're going against culture taboos and not actually about the sex itself. And that's why authors do it.
Yeah, now we're going to explain examples about when they write about sex that's not sex. Next one, please.
Stop.
So basically, an example the author provides is the French lieutenant's woman, and so
a guy named Charles, main character, has to marry a girl he does not love. Red, not love. And he has a job that he hates. And so he feels really restricted and feels horrified at the fact that he has to live this reality that he does not want to live. So, who wants to marry a person that you don't want to marry, right? And then he has sex with a girl named Sarah at a hotel. And obviously, in societal norms right now and back then, you're not supposed to have sex with somebody that you're not married to. So by doing that, she represents forbidden fruit. And the act of sex represents freedom, individualism, and autonomy due to the fact that he's breaking out of the societal norms. And he's like, oh yeah, I don't like the reality. So he kind of shows by having sex that he's trying to break out of the restricted cage that he is in. So that's kind of symbolic how sex is used to represent something else. Yeah.
So basically, as everyone said before, whenever the author writes explicitly about sex itself, it doesn't mean just sex on the surface. So basically, it can mean things such as covering up for crimes, personal sacrifice, the need for psychological dependence, and the desire for power over another individual. And this can also be seen especially in rape scenes. If there's ever any a piece of literature that's just an example of how a person desires overwhelmingly power the other person because they have issues.
And another thing that I thought was kind of interesting was the fact that you guys all seen or heard of Friends with Benefits? No? Well, I mean, I've heard of it, right? Friends with Benefits, the movie?
Yes.
Right? So that kind of shows they are kind of lonely and emptiness. So while they do have sex, it kind of it's representative of their loneliness without a partner and just sex itself, sometimes.
So, O'Brien writes about sex in religious. You mean freedom from conservative, repressed, religious society or failure of liberation? So sex represents politics and art and freedom in a way.
Yeah, so sex can mean these things, but most importantly, one of our slides didn't go through, and that was the most important one. So Jack, can you scoop back until we find it? I think you clicked on it twice, and that's the one with I put outside examples. One more. One more. Right here. All right, this is the most important one. So examples that we see in real life. So, have you guys ever heard of the American drama Heroes? If you guys haven't, that's fine. So it's about superheroes, and there's a scene where a guy named Peter and Claire falls down together, and like we said, falling down means sexual intercourse. And Peter absorbs Claire's power, and that's the reason they live. And later in the storyline, we find out they're biologically related. Therefore, not sex, but it shows they're biologically related, and it's kind of representing of sexuality. Second one is I found an old movie called Over the Rainbow where a girl sets up a dartboard and a guy throws it and it's the bullseye. And that's symbolically bam. Okay. Avatar. You all know Avatar, right? There are a lot of beach and campfire scenes, as we see in the picture of Aang and Tara, right?
Not Avatar.
Ruin the childhood. Ruining the childhood. First Little Red Riding Hood.
That they got married, so you know it's foreshadowing. And finally, the last example we have is Flow Rida. Everybody, yeah, heard the song? Can you blow my whistle?
Sadly. Sadly.
I hope you don't know what this means. So yeah, this is kind of like real life examples that we can see in our contemporary dramas.
I love that
movies,
song.
Songs and shows that we all love to watch that we can really find like sex that's not really sex. I mean, that's not really sex that implies sex. And let's go all the way to the end. There's a quiz. There's a quiz. Go, 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 go. We don't have time. I'm so sorry. Yeah, there's a quiz. Go.
Okay, so basically, we have foreheads for people who answer these questions.
Oh snap, I came prepared.
Oh.
So, question number 1. Who is D.H. Lawrence and what did he do? It was on our PowerPoint slide.
Just yell it out. First one to yell it out.
Didn't he read the sexual
No.
We talked about sex.
Didn't he have like
Yeah, the
two men
wrestling.
wrestling for like sexual?
You got a warhead, so come and get it.
So, number 2, name one outside example.
What?
Negative points.
Number 3, when an author writes about sex, what does it actually mean? And give us an example.
So for example, in the Titanic, as Inwan mentioned, when they have sex, it's more of the breaking the cultural taboo because I think Jack's like a peasant or something and she's like really rich. And so it's not necessarily about sex, but about cultural.
Good.
Ah, you're so
Okay,
good.
name a novel's name in the small detail example.
Oh, not the novel's name, just an example that I provided
Small
outside.
example.
Or yeah, actually yeah, the novel's name. Anybody? Anybody?
Small details.
And
Does anyone
anybody?
remember the name of the sort of like the bowl and like the fair?
Any example you said. No, not that one. The one that Blossom mentions in the story.
The small detail one.
The bowl and
The
the
bowl.
Oh, yeah, word.
Come on, guys, you're taking my time. we're like 30 seconds overboard. All right. Anybody? Name all 4 of the real life example I gave you.
Over the rainbow, Titanic.
No, not Titanic. What's the last one?
Avatar. Whistle.
You still get the thing. Alright, can you back up a slide?
No, don't back up, don't back up, don't back up.
Round of applause, everybody. And that